Welcome to another Codacy Talk. This month on the topic of level up your team's code reviews. So from a management perspective, how can you help your team improve their code review process, make it better, faster, and more productive? So my name is Eloisa from the Codacy marketing team, and I'm joined today by Kendrick Curtis, our engineering manager, and Mark Raylin, our lead account executive. And so just a little bit more about who's speaking today. We can go to the next slide, please. Yes. Who are we? So Mark is our lead account executive who's been working for over 10 years in tech sales, 6-year Codacy veteran. He's been with us for a while, which means he's consulted on hundreds of developer organizations. And we also have Kendrick, our engineering manager lead, 18 years plus in software development, third people management role, a Scrum Master. Thank you both for joining today, and thank you everyone in the audience for coming to this talk. What do we have planned for today? We can go to the next slide, please. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. So in a minute, I'll just very quickly go through our agenda for today. So starting with, personal experience and lessons learned from our engineering manager. And then we're going to do a workshop, a live workshop on how to build your best code review checklist yet. Then a little word on automating and controlling your whole process. When and how does it make sense? And a live demonstration coming up by Mark. Then we're going to quickly also talk about measuring success. Again, if you're a team lead, how can you measure the impact of all of these great tips that we're going to share today? And Q&A time at the end. We're going to keep this, brief as usual, so that we can give everyone plenty of time for this exchange at the end to ask all of your questions. So about 15 minutes for the Q&A. And if I can just give you a spoiler, there is a chance that you can win one of our awesome Codacy swag packs with many goodies within. You can just stay a little bit longer until the end to find out more, and I will show you at the end of this presentation. So let's get started. I would love for our panelists to introduce themselves and start. Let's get started. So please take it from here.
Yeah, hi. And the Codacy swag is great. I went to Lisbon in November. I came back with Codacy socks. Who does swag socks? Isn't that great? Hi, I'm Kendrick. I'm an engineering manager. I joined here in November. So not been at Codacy itself particularly very long, but I have been at a lot of developer organizations in the last 18 years, which means I've seen lots of good, bad, and indifferent places. So let's crack on. You saw this bit before. That's a shame, isn't it? I've got nothing to say about that. It's just a funny gif. Right, so I'm going to tell you a story. It's not a super interesting story, but the details themselves are interesting, and I think tell us a bit about how to do stuff better and well. And I try and keep my slides very short and then talk a lot, and I'm probably going to go over time, so sorry. So in a previous role, and I've seen some people here from that previous role, hello, and hopefully this story is going to match up with your reminiscences, so you can complain to me later if it doesn't. We work somewhere where code reviews were taking a very long time. Perhaps you yourself are in that situation where code reviews are taking days. We had some PRs that have been open for months there, which is exciting, isn't it? Because once code goes stale, it's kind of pointless. You've got to get it done. So we made a couple of changes, and the changes sound very simple, and they're not. I'm going to try and talk about those changes in some detail to try and help if you haven't encountered these situations or how you might solve these problems in future. Now, I'm going to try not to be super prescriptive. I'm going to try and keep it to be like what I did and my experience, because every organization is different. I've seen a lot of them. Your struggles are different to my struggles. So take all of this with an appropriate pinch of salt, basically. So we made a couple of changes. One of them is very simple. We made smaller teams, and we made a code review checklist, right? And I'm mostly going to talk about the latter point. So why and how did this work? Oh, and the result was it worked, and code reviews went down from like multiple days to like under 8 hours, right? Spoiler, sorry, it worked. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here telling you about it. So before we even talk about the details, then this is a process of change, right? And if you want change to happen as an engineering leader, you need buy-in, right? And you don't get buy-in just by magic. People have to care either about the company you're in, or the product or project that they're working on, or something about their own personal characteristics, their own career development goals, or whatever, right? And so part of your job as an engineering manager is to find out what that is. And I'm not going to talk a lot about this because, like I say, I want to talk about code reviews, but just there is a process of change here, and just have a little bit of a thought as to how you want change to work in your organization, right? So I noticed this was a problem first from people complaining on Slack, and then raising it in retrospectives, and understanding that there was a problem there. And you go to Jira and look at the time in status and see, hey, time in status for code reviews is enormous, right? So what are we going to do about that? I don't like to tell people what to do. This is going to surprise the people who've worked with me before, but I don't, because it doesn't work. People don't like to be told what to do, particularly not developers, right? How you really want to structure things is for them to understand there's a problem, come up with ideas for a problem, broadcast the ideas, choose the right one, try it and solve it, right? So find who the people are in your organization who are having the problem, and find who the authorities are in your organization that people trust to lead change, and get those people to help you, hint them, talk to them, nudge them, encourage them to try and solve the problem, right? We had a 2-weekly senior developers call, and it was raised and talked about on there. And one of the things we talked about was having a workshop around code reviews, but not specifically about checklists. That's the one bit that I brought to this process that I'll own. Right, next slide. Right, so I talked about small teams, and again, books have been written. I am reading one right now called Team Topologies. It's interesting, read it. About how to organize your development teams. Again, I'm not going to talk about this in great detail, but we had 2 teams of 8+ developers, and we split it into 4 teams of 4 or 5. And part of the reason you do that is that it is the Amazon concept of pizza-sized teams, right? No team should be bigger than can be fed on 2 pizzas. They never specify whether they're like 12-inch or 14-inch pizzas. Anyway, 4 or 5 developers is a good number. And when you do that, then magically people start to take more responsibility for what's happening within the team, particularly if you align what the teams are doing to the value and the mission that the business is doing, or particular parts of it. So before you even talk about code reviews taking a long time, think about how your teams are set up. Again, it's a whole different webinar. And I also mentioned a checklist. So this book, I'm going to spoil, but you should read it anyway. It's great. It's the Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande. He was a surgeon who saw how randomly patient safety was in medicine, and looked to the lessons of the aviation industry to try and bring lessons from there into the operating theatre. And even if you know all about checklists, and even if you use one, you should read the book, because it's really engaging, and it's all about like medical stories that make things better. So please do that. I'm going to crib a few bits out of it now, just to give you an idea of why checklists are good, right? So where to start? So everybody, I hope, knows what a checklist is, or has an idea. There's a set of things, you do the things, and you finish the task, right? Even that concept is useful for code reviews if you're not doing it already, because certainly some of the places that I've worked, the way that code review works is the ticket moves from in progress in Jira into in review, stuff happens, and then it moves from review to done, or whatever your next status is. And it's not necessarily clear what is happening or what has to happen there. And something we're going to do later is talk about what you think ought to happen there. But spoiler, it's different in pretty much every engineering organization. Just having a checklist that lets you know when you're finished, I think, has value. But what sort of things should you have on that checklist, right? So one example that Atal Gawande talks about in the book is I think that there's a hospital chain in, I think, Detroit or somewhere in the US where they're having significant issues with patients dying post-operatively due to getting infected on the operating table, right? And that's not really surprising because in an operating theatre, even though people are scrubbed up and they've cleaned themselves and everything, you essentially have between 4 and 8 sweaty humans breathing over an open cavity of a person where, you know, blood and organs are like easily available for bacteria to land on, right? And obviously that's understood in medicine, right? There's a solution to this, right? You should be given a pre-operative antibiotic before you go into surgery, between ideally 2 hours and 20 minutes before surgery starts. And so that's the default in hospitals. That is a thing that ought to happen. But the actual rate of patients getting that antibiotic in that hospital chain was about 40%, right? And the result was something like 1/3 of all of the people dying post-operatively, they were dying from infections getting on the operating table. Many, many things happened to get to the point of them having a checklist that was actually adopted, and we'll talk about adoption later. But that checklist item of has the patient had their pre-operative antibiotic between 2 hours and 20 minutes before surgery changed the outcomes to there being like the number of people dying post-operatively for an infection on the operating table to 0, right? And no technology and no surgical technique could improve outcomes as good as ticking a box. What does that tell us about in software, right? Are there times when we look back and think, if only X had happened in review, this thing wouldn't have gone wrong in production? There are, aren't there? The one that really comes to mind for me is, did you run the unit tests? Really? Because that doesn't happen every time, and it will come up on a lot of code review templates or checklists that this is the thing that should happen. So I spoke a little bit about adoption there. So again, Atal Gawande is very good about understanding how you actually get checklists adopted. It is not good enough to just say, well, he tried it. He was like, okay, well, I'm a surgeon. Here's my checklist of 10 things. I'm going to try it in my surgery. It was a disaster. Nothing happened, and he ignored it half the time because it turns out surgeons have big egos and don't like being told what to do, right? What worked was giving the checklist to the nurse, whose job was to not allow the operation to go forward until the checklist had been completed. And that got much, much better uptake through enforcement by the right agent. So that is something worth remembering. But how do you even come up with a checklist, right? What things should come on, should be on it? I told you that Atal Gawande himself came up with a checklist. But actually, the things that he came up with were not actually the most effective or best ones. And there was a whole scientific process that went months behind this, which happens in the book, where they go away and get lots of experts to figure out what should be on a checklist, come up with about 35 items. And even that didn't work very well because it's too many items, and actually it's different in all different places. The best people to come up with your checklist are the developers who actually have to do the work, right? So we did a workshop. It's not quite activity time yet, don't get too excited. So what we did in that workshop is that we got all of our developers from the whole product, about 20 people at the time, and put them in groups of 4, got them to spend about 20 minutes in each group just brainstorming in those little groups. And again, we use little groups because that gets you responsibility, that gets people talking, building relationships on a small scale. It's worth doing. Don't just have a room of 20 people doing it. To brainstorm, come up with ideas, discard things, eventually bring them all back to the big group, come up with a big list. And we came up with a big list of about 35 items. And again, sorry to go back here, best checklists are short because otherwise people don't do them. So not only do you want buy-in, not only do you want the developers to come up with them, you also want to pick the most important things that are going to make the biggest difference. And they don't need to be too specific, which is interesting. You know, one of the lessons from aviation that Atul Gandhi covers in the book is that, like, in aviation, there's a checklist for everything, right? You have a pre-flight checklist, you have a post-flight checklist. Any problems that happen on your flight, there is a checklist for it, right? And the checklists are short and punchy. And they, like, for instance, in the case of an engine failure, like, one of the items on the checklist will be restart the engine or flush the fuel lines. And those things are not just a button that you can push in the cabin. I'm pretty sure. Right? I don't fly planes, but I'm pretty sure there isn't a restart the engine button and that's it. There's probably a whole sequence of steps they have to go through, which is fine because they're airline pilots. They're trained. They know what they're doing. All it is a prompt. You know, have you turned it off and on again? And they can go and do that and come back. There's another interesting one actually, which is sort of not relevant to what we do, but one of the options is very often fly the plane, because actually one thing it's very easy to do in a high pressure environment is get distracted and actually fail to actually continue to steer the aircraft. And there have been a couple of aviation disasters where, while trying to restart the engine or descend to a safe height or whatever it is, the pilot has crashed into a mountain or something because they were not flying the plane. There is a tiny way that can become relevant to us, which I'll call back later. Okay, so we do not have time to do a complete code review workshop, and all of you are from different engineering organizations anyway. But we can at least have a little try to do step one here of, let's use the chat. I'm going to open the chat now myself so I can see it. And switch it on to the everyone view. And you tell us, what things do you think should actually happen in a code review? I'm going to spend about 3-4 minutes here, just bang out some ideas, anything that comes to mind. We'll try and tally up some of the most popular ones. And you see that they fall into certain groups, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So go ahead, bang some things into the chat. I can't see anything happening in there right now, so I don't know if I'm just looking at the wrong thing. But
the chat is still, it's open, but no one's saying anything yet. Okay, we have started our first suggestion.
Thank you very much, Marilesh. If I had the influence to get you 2 tries in the prize draw at the end, I'd do that.
Anyone else? Yeah, let's get as many opinions as possible. Let's go.
Oh, that's good. And James, you've done this before. You should have half a dozen ideas. I mentioned, which is, did you run the tests? And this is all valid stuff, obviously. Yeah, there are actually, that's a good point from Louisa. There are actually quite a few people contributing now, but the default chat setting is to only talk to hosts and panelists. So don't be shy. lots of good stuff. I'll give it 1 more minute and then we'll carry on. But thank you everybody for your inputs.
We should have had some elevator music playing. So sorry, everyone. We'll have it next time.
Oh, localization, that's a good one. Yep. And again, there's your conflict between engineering, different engineering organizations. Somebody says comments in the code are important. Someone else says, is the code clear without the comments? And both approaches are valid, right? It depends entirely on your organization. While people keep on writing things, I'm going to keep on commenting them on them, and we'll continue to give it 1 more minute. All right. Okay, we're going to move on now, I think. But thank you everybody for your contributions. And here's the interesting thing. So I actually have come up with a final checklist. I pulled it out of the air like Atul Gawande did. And so it's inevitably wrong for any given organization, right? And I've also attempted to divide the potential things up into groups. And I'm also fairly sure I've not covered every single comment that everyone has put down in the chat into a group, right? So even that I failed at. And the lesson there is that the people you work with are going to come up with really great ideas that you didn't have. People come up with great ideas that I didn't have every day at my job. So listen to them and enable them to have those ideas, right? But just as an example checklist, you might have something to look that looks like this, right? So does the PR have a good description and screenshots of the change, right? Is the context set? Because quite often you'll have people reviewing code that they didn't necessarily actually were that deep into, and so it's useful for them to have a quick refresher without having to go off to Jira or whatever. And it might be a very specific piece of the task as well. Did you check out the code and run the tests? Are there even unit tests? Does the code conform to some internal rules? So there are people talking about localization, like have you added the strings to the localization tool, right? Actually, there's a load of different ways to do localization. You might have a whole team whose job is to do localization based on a number of new strings that appear in their database when they do a push pull or whatever, right? So again, make it sensitive to your organization. Did you increment the version number if you're doing something with dependencies on it? Somebody mentioned OWASP vulnerabilities, well done. That's around security. Again, there's a whole webinar to do that. That's not me to do that. I'm not clever enough to understand all the OWASP vulnerabilities, but stuff like SQL injection, have you sanitized your inputs, that sort of stuff. Does it actually do what it's supposed to do? This is where I can come back and reference fly the plane, right? Because if the code meets all of your other goals, if it's 100% tested and 100% secure and the change is well described, if it doesn't actually do what it's supposed to, then kind of doesn't matter, right? All the other things are immaterial. But you might say, actually, on our checklist, that's obvious. Of course, the developers are going to do that. They do that every day. The things we want them to remember are these things, right? And again, here are the groups I think they can divide into broadly. So there's code quality. We saw a few comments around coding style and coding standards and that sort of thing. Security, we mentioned testing and coverage, company specific stuff, deployment to workflow steps. I think, again, it's also fairly company specific. And then correctness and completeness. So quite a few people saying, essentially, does this break anything anywhere else? Is this a breaking change in, like, have you written the database migrations and that sort of thing? So all of that good stuff. So if you were doing this workshop, then you'd want to vote on the things you think are most important and actually make that checklist. And see how doable they are. Something that nobody mentioned in the chat, which is really interesting actually, is did you check out the code and try it yourself? Because that is something that has at least historically been potentially an expectation in some code reviews, but the number of times people actually do it is fairly low because it's actually really expensive to do that. You know, as a developer yourself, you have to context switch, you've got to potentially destroy and rebuild your whole environment just to test a 3-line change, and maybe it's not worth it, right? But there are other things that you can accomplish very easily. There are things that you can automate even. And that is where I'm going to hand over to Mark.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kendrick. This was great. And now it's demo time. For those of you here who are already familiar with Codacy or have been using the platform, you're going to be seeing a few things that you're familiar with, hopefully a few new things as well. For those who have not yet used Codacy, Codacy is a code standardization platform. We have 2 products, Code Quality and Pulse, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. For right now, we want to focus on how can we actually turn some of these checklist items into an automated solution that's basically going to take care of some of the code review parts so that your developers can focus on the more difficult stuff. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we can dive right into that. All right, I hope this is visible. I'm going to show this to you with the example.
I don't think we can see it. Sorry,
Oh.
Mark.
Okay, it says that my screen share is loading.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I'm still
Let me try
seeing
again.
just the deck.
No worries. Let me give this another try. It says that my screen share is loading.
Hold on.
Let me know when it's visible. All right, now it should
What
be.
about now? Okay.
It should be there. All right. Cool, let's go. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with this view. We are on GitHub, and this is a public project by one of our client companies, which is Artemis. The repository is called Artemis. And we're going to take a look at how Codacy lives inside this specific pull request that was opened some time ago.
I think they're still seeing my screen share, so let me just stop sharing and you can pick it up.
Oh, sure. Thank you, dear attendees, for bringing this up. All right. All right, I think we're on. Let's go. So again, welcome back to GitHub. Today we're going to talk about how Codacy can automate some of your checklist items right here within the pull request. And for this, I'm going to scroll down this pull request in the Artemis project. It's a public repository, so you can also check this out later on GitHub. If we go all the way down, you're going to find the section with your pull request checks. So what this team is doing is they have a lot of different things in place for testing, for dependency checks, and then obviously for static code analysis. And this is where Codacy comes in. Codacy is essentially a platform that is going to automate code reviews, you know, along those different dimensions of static code analysis. So looking at your source code, what can we tell you about the code quality? What are the standards that you have defined, and how can we enforce those standards so nothing slips through into production to cause any headache later on? We can see already that the Codacy check has failed. This means that some of the standards that were defined by this team have not been met. Now, we want to know a bit more about this. So what we can do is we can go over to details. This will bring us to the checks page, where we have an entire overview of everything that Codacy has detected on this particular pull request before the merge was actually made. We can see a summary here up top, including the number of issues that were solved and added. So we can even see ourselves cleaning up our code base, cleaning up our technical debt over time, as well as the files that were increasing in complexity or decreasing in complexity. Another metric that may show up here for you would be duplications and clones, which in this case is not being a problem, as well as code coverage, which is also not integrated here. But just to give you a quick sneak peek, we just launched a new pull request summary for code coverage. It's going to look something like this. So if you want to try this out, you can go ahead to codacy.com, sign up, add your repositories, submit your coverage reports, and get this automated summary on every single pull request. And down here, we actually see the issues that Codacy detected. So when we talk about issues, this could be anything from, simple styling rules all the way to security problems, such as hard-coded encryption keys down here. So with this, without even going to the Codacy platform, I can see exactly what's going on, take decisions on what I want to fix, and how to approach this. And then in the end of the day, have a clean merge, without causing any problems later on. Now we can see the same on the Codacy page. If we want to dive deeper, we're going to see a few areas here. For instance, we can open up the issues to understand what they mean. If we're not sure about what this issue refers to, we get all the context that we need. And we can then also look at the bigger picture. If I just want to see the evolution of my code quality for this repository, or actually any branch I'm interested in, I'm going over here and I can see how every single commit and pull request has impacted my code quality over time. And as you can see here, this team definitely has their code quality under control. They're not going above their goal of having roughly 5% of issues. They're not dropping the coverage. So Codacy is really helping them stick with the standards that they have defined over time. Now, talking about standards, I'm just going to give you a very quick idea of what it would look like to create a checklist and basically implement it on Codacy. I'm going to call it my coding standards. And it's as simple as selecting the languages that I'm using. So let's pick Java and JavaScript, for example. And I'm going to see here a list of all of the analyzers that are integrated in Codacy that you can leverage to then select which rules you want to follow and what not. You can turn off the ones that you don't really care about, and then essentially apply that to whatever repositories you would like to follow these rules. And that's essentially that. If you would like to have a deeper demo or a deep dive at the end of the webinar, you're going to be able to fill in the form and also request a one-on-one session with myself or one of my colleagues, so we can explore how exactly this can also work for yourself if you are not using Codacy just yet. And back to you, Kendrick.
I'm going to share my screen again. Yeah, so what happened next when talking about us having a code review checklist, right? I spoiled it earlier. Our code reviews went from taking more than 3 days to less than 8 hours. But that wasn't all, right? Because that wasn't the end. It turns out that software development is an iterative process, and you've got to keep on doing it. But that's great because the teams themselves took charge of those checklists and chose how to make them better, right? So it wasn't right first time. It was too long, even with the number of items we had on it. And so because we had a 2-weekly check-in between the senior devs, they were bringing things from their teams, hearing things from retrospectives, hearing things on Slack, and simple changes like, can we merge these 2 items or should we delete those items? I could go and action straight away, right? So people could see things happening to make it better in real time. Something we didn't do very well then was track the effect. So we tracked the change of how long it took to get things through code review in Jira, because you can do that. Jira's sort of out of the box reporting is not great, honestly, but it can do time in status fairly well. So we did track watching that code review time go down to such a small level that we stopped caring about it and stopped tracking it because we had fixed that problem, which is great. We didn't know about DORA metrics. I say I didn't know about DORA metrics or about cycle time at that time. Otherwise, we probably would have tracked those, and we would have seen significant improvements in cycle time from work going into progress with a developer and being finished, basically, which is a very good signal that your coding organization is working effectively. Now, I didn't know about DORA metrics or about cycle time before I joined Codacy. And I only joined in November, so I'm not really the person to talk about them. Fortunately, we have an expert. Forgot we're having a poll here, aren't we, before we get to this? So I think there is a poll, which is, how do you currently measure your engineering performance? Eloisa, can you start that up?
All right, so everyone here, you're going to see a poll just magically pop up on your screen, and please give us your vote so we so that we can see how everyone is measuring their engineering performance. So here it is, it's live. How do you track engineering performance? Choose all the options that apply. And I can tell you that at least 50% of people chose sprint velocity. So yeah, I think I'm sharing the results with you now very quickly so everyone in the audience can know. It was sprint velocity and then individual performance reviews. But let's see if you're right or if you're on the right track. I'm gonna hand it over to Mark now.
Awesome. Thank you, Elisa. This is interesting to see. The majority of you does not use DORA metrics to track engineering performance. I'm hoping that more of you are aware of those metrics, but for those who have not come across the Accelerate book yet, here's just going to be a very quick primer. The book was published in 2018 and essentially was a team that collected survey responses from around 2,000 organizations from all the different sizes, different industries. And there were a couple of key discoveries, the most important one being that they identified essentially 4 key metrics that happened to be good classifiers, appear to be good classifiers of software delivery performance. And those are the 4 metrics that you can see here on this current page. And I'm just going to go quickly through them. We have deployment frequency, which measures how often your organization completes a deployment to production or releases code to end users. The lead time for changes, how long it takes a single commit to be pushed to production. The time to recover, how long it takes the organization to recover from a failure in production, and the change failure rate. So how many or what part of the deployments actually leads to a failure in production that then requires to be remediated. Now, on top of this, also following Kenrick's personal advice, we also want to include cycle time. This is has proven to be a really helpful metric, especially looking at your tasks and tickets, which is essentially the time that it takes your team to complete those items after starting to work on them actively. So it doesn't consider the backlog, but just the active work on those items. Now, I have mentioned the Pulse platform when I was talking about our quality solution. The Pulse platform is our latest solution that we launched last September. So it's very fresh, and it's essentially currently one of the easiest ways for you to obtain these DORA metrics by simply integrating the tools that you already use in your development lifecycle, such as GitHub or Jira or PagerDuty. And now I'm going to switch over to my screen just to give you a very quick overview of that as well. For those who haven't seen Pulse yet, you can sign up within seconds and literally with one-click integrations at GitHub, Bitbucket, Jira, and so on to actually see what your current DORA metrics are today. I want to make sure we don't repeat the same mistake as before. So Kenrick, if you want to stop sharing, I'm going to go ahead. I hope this is now visible. All right. So welcome to the Pulse platform. This is going to be a very quick one. You'll see that the overview is super clean, super tidy. It's really 100% focused on the 4 DORA metrics that we just described that were identified in this research. And what you can do here is essentially break it down by whatever systems or teams you are focusing on. Compare yourself to the industry by using these performance grades that are also defined in the Accelerate book itself. And yeah, track your performance over time, even add decisions, add notes for certain activities that have happened at a point in time, which is then going to be visible for the rest of the team so that you can make smart connections between your performance and decisions that have been made in the company. Another view I want to show you, and this is one of my personal favorites, if we go down here, this is the changes and reviews dashboards. And if we scroll all the way down, this is going to show me a plot chart where I see every single pull request that is currently open. And with one view, I can see how many changes have happened on this pull request, how many comments are happening, are the teams discussing these pull requests in a lot of detail? Do we need to unblock anybody? And of course, how long have the pull requests been open? So you can see all of these dimensions in just this single review time explorer. And last but not least, we can also drill down into the cycle time as well as the lead time, which essentially is based on your own Jira tasks. You can break it down by types of issues or look at all of them at once and get a really clear understanding of how every single task that your team is working on is performing in context. And this, in a very quick nutshell, is the Pulse platform. So once again, you can sign up yourself by going to pulse.codacy.com, or reach out to us if you want to discuss this in more detail. And and we can see how your DORA metrics are performing today. And this is me. I'm going to go back to Kendrick.
Thank you. We're almost at the end, but speaking of measuring success, I just want to tell you that our next webinar will be precisely about this. We want to talk about engineering metrics next, in more detail, why they matter, how elite teams are using them. We can have a nice discussion. So if you're interested in joining the next webinar, you can fill the webinar that's going to pop up here at the end of this session. It's a Zoom survey. And then you can answer yes in the question that says, are you interested in the next webinar? Another reason to fill the survey at the end is you can win, like we said, this awesome pack of goodies, a whole box just for yourself with 2 t-shirts, a laptop sleeve, some stickers. So if you want to do that, it's very simple. Just fill the survey at the end, give us some feedback about what you thought about this webinar and what we should learn about next. And just by doing that, you're automatically, registered for a draw, and we're going to draw one of your names and contact you and get in touch with you very soon. If you're the winner, you'll hear from us. So without further ado, let's open the Q&A. I asked you if you had any questions. I still don't see many, but let's go over to the Q&A box here at the bottom. You can ask anonymously or anything you want for Mark and Kendrick to answer. Don't be shy. Okay, let's answer the first one. So, should I start code review meetings? Will this be effective?
Yeah, I'll take this
one. What do you think?
So we saw, in fact, something I had not heard of before 2022 was, in fact, the concept of mob PRs, where teams were not just having a code review meeting, like they weren't just talking one person through code review, they're talking the entire team through code review. And they tried that at all scales, tiny ones, huge ones. And it was effective. Problems could get raised and discussed in real time, and fixes could be put in real time, and you get to the end of the meeting and feel like you've actually completed it. It's also a very good way of increasing enforceability of checklists, right? Because if you've got the whole team looking at some code and you've got a checklist, then there is going to be somebody who says, have we run the unit tests? Did you bump the version? And actually tick those things off. So I think doing code review meetings is great for accountability. It might or might not work for your organization. Here at Codacy, then we're trying to be more asynchronous rather than more synchronous. We have developers spread across numerous time zones, and actually having to synchronize for meetings like that might not be such a good choice. But in your organization, particularly if you're all in office seated in one place, perhaps it's a great option. Try it, see if it works, and if it doesn't, do something different.
Next question. How do you find the balance between working on your own tasks versus reviewing others' code?
The perennial problem, right? And it depends who you are in your organization, right? Because if you are a technical lead or a senior with many years of experience in your organization, people are going to tag you on every single code review, aren't they? And that's not going to be fun. You're going to spend your entire day doing code reviews. So partly it's about making sure you have this cascade where the juniors are asking the mediums, and the mediums are asking the seniors, and the seniors are asking the leads for help on their work, right? And tagging the right people. If you're in a situation where everybody always gets tagged for every code review, maybe think about ways that you can cut down on that by increasing internal mentorship like that, so that you're not spending all day doing code reviews. I realize that's not really answering the question. but try and make sure that you are contributing the most value. The other thing I'm going to bore you with is the concept of the eudaimonia machine. Let me try and spell that in the chat. Which is the concept of the perfect working environment where you have the gallery and the office. There's the gallery where you show stuff off. There's the office where you coordinate and collaborate with lots of people, kind of like the cafe, really. The small office where you're coordinating with one or two other people, or then the study where you go to do deep work. And I would suggest trying to structure your day chronologically into periods of, I am going to do deep work in this time now. I'm going to do code reviews in this time now. It's kind of easier if you have code review meetings, and if you're going to have code review meetings, maybe do them straight after the daily stand-up or something like that, in order to try and compress and reduce that switching time between different modes.
Okay, thank you, Kendrick. We learned something new. I'm not going to try to say this word. You typed in the chat, but it looks great. So Muralish Clinton is asking, my team is too lazy to review others' code. They keep on approving without actually reviewing. So how can this be improved? Yeah, how can you deal with this as a manager?
Yeah, so I think that goes right back to almost my very first slide, which is buy-in, right? People have got to want to solve the problem. People have got to be engaged in what the problem is. If the problem is that nobody's doing code reviews, then why is that? It's because they're working on a project they don't care about? Is it because the company is producing something they don't care about? Is what's happening in their professional life not aligned with their career and personal development goals? Sort those things out and people will want to do code reviews, rather than trying to impose stuff on people, is my opinion, because imposing checklists and things on people doesn't work. I will say, again, automating enforceability through stuff like Codacy for the stuff that you can automate means that those steps will happen. If you can't manage to engage your people, then you can at least ensure that the code coverage stays at a certain percentage, and their PRs won't actually get submitted unless they raise it to a certain level. But yeah, fundamentally, that seems to me to be a cultural problem within the organization.
100%. Yes. Let's move on to the next one. How can I learn from code reviews? And there's plenty to learn.
And sorry, just on the previous question, that's a great question, by the way. How can I learn from the code reviews? Presume that you are speaking as someone who is a developer rather than as an engineering manager. It's almost impossible to not learn from code reviews, isn't it? You read the comments, you understand what people are asking. Like, maybe ask why more if you don't feel like you're learning. Like, why did you tell me to do that? Because that's not really a question about automated solutions. That's a question about your own sort of professional growth, right? I don't think I have much more to say about that. I realize that's maybe not the most helpful answer, so sorry.
Oh, I think that was great. Thank you. Should we move on to the next one? Please feel free to keep asking us questions. We have a few more minutes, so we don't mind answering your questions at all. My team works in multiple projects at a time. So how could we have measure of my team members along multiple repos and projects? How can we measure?
So in terms of the DORA metrics and in terms of Pulse does that, because you can filter your entire statistical data set by team or by, I'm not sure if you can actually do it by individual actually, but if you have a team that works across multiple projects, you can at least get the data on that team, regardless of which projects they're contributing to. Actually, the Accelerate book, I believe, is quite big on group responsibility rather than individual responsibility. If you look at any individual's performance, then it's not necessarily that a reliable indicator of their success. Like, you might have people, just as a stupid example, people whose cycle time is really high. They're taking ages to do things. Is that because they're a junior, or because they're a senior who's given the most complicated problems, right? So just be wary about what metrics say about individuals.
Nice, thank you, Kendrick. One more question is, when we're talking about the code review workshop that we saw earlier, what if you have a workshop and no one engages and people hate speaking in public?
Yep. So a couple of things. One, buy in. Again, make sure that people are actually committed to solving your problems, right? But the other part is that you cheat. The reason you have a senior in each one of those teams, or not even a senior, but someone who is someone who you already got on side and talked to about the process and outlined what's happening in each one of those groups, is that they are the people who can actually have a few ideas up front, lead and suggest things, because once people start suggesting something, it's very hard for people to keep quiet if they disagree, right? One of my very common tactics in meetings, people who know me will know I do this, is to suggest something stupid on the basis that someone else who's cleverer than I am will suggest a better answer instead, because they can see that it's stupid. But not to trivialize it, it is a skill for leaders to try and draw out conversation from people, because there are some developers, some people in all walks of life who are very quiet, who don't feel like their opinion necessarily means very much. You rely on those leaders within those smaller groups to actually ask, right? Hey, so-and-so, what do you think about this? Do you think this is a good idea? What would you rather? So actually try and draw those people into conversation with people you've already prepared about the subject, is what I would say.
And maybe just to add to this, just another small idea. If it's really a team where people struggle to, to speak in public or to speak in front of big groups, consider using collaboration tools where, you can split up the workshop into different groups, use virtual tools. You probably know some out there, Miro, for example, and see if that helps. Basically giving people the opportunity to express themselves in written form, on some virtual platform like that could also help you accomplish that.
For sure. And also that's why I suggested breaking out into smaller groups as well, because absolutely you don't want one person having to stand up in front of 20 and say something that's scary. I've done that, I know that's scary. So some ideas there.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I think we are going to have to close the Q&A because we're reaching the end, but I see really interesting questions coming up. I just want to let you know that even if we don't answer your question live, we can reach out to you later. If you fill the survey at the end, we can definitely reach out to you if you can just repeat your question there, the feedback survey. We'll also write a blog about this webinar, so maybe we can tackle your question then. If you follow our social media, you'll see it. But thank you so much for watching and asking us all these questions. Big thank you also to Mark and Kendrick for sharing their experience and knowledge today. Don't worry, because we will share a recording of this session with everyone who signed up. So you'll receive this recording to watch later if you want. And yeah, stay tuned for more Codacy live talks. Follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to be up to date with the next webinars. Like we said, we do want to talk about engineering metrics next. So let us know if you want to watch that webinar, if you want to be invited. And yeah, thank you so much for coming. I think this is goodbye from us. We're signing off. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Hope to see you at the next webinar.
See you there.